Thank you for watching this presentation, which is a re-recording of a presentation I did recently at the Victorian Studies Association of Western Canada conference. And this discussion is titled Before Galleries Exhibiting Regina's Visual Culture. I'm Linz Demchuk, and I study art history and curation at University of Regina. And this discussion will be about where visual art was displayed during the late Victorian period of Regina. Thank you to the VSOC conference for accepting my proposal, and to the conference organizers, as well as to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, whose funding I am proud to be a recipient of. I have a few acknowledgements to make as far as my scholarly family tree. Thank you to my primary supervisor, Dr. Carla McManus, and co-supervisor, Dr. Sherry Farrell-Reset. Also to art historians, the late Cheryl Mazeros, as well as Lisa Henderson, whose research works to address a scholarship gap in prairie art history. Their good work has been foundational as I begin to write my master's thesis. Today's presentation is a portion of a future chapter of my thesis with the working title, Before Galleries, Regina's Early Art Exhibitions and Visual Culture. My interest in curation, festivals, and Regina history drew me to the question of where displays of art in Regina took place prior to the existence of a professional art gallery. Where were artworks displayed for public viewing, particularly in the form of temporary exhibitions? Exploring this is important because reflecting on what was displayed, where it was displayed, and who created it provides a better understanding of the local culture and the arts environment. The following presentation will show how Regina's early agricultural fairs were an important first step for artists to exhibit locally. Regina was so named in 1882, and this period lacks thorough attention by art historians and curators. A handful of exhibitions featuring early Saskatchewan artworks have occurred, but they are limited in scope, and the art history is often reduced to a few key figures. Written local histories make few references to exhibitions of artwork. An early history of Regina briefly mentions the Regina Society for the Advancement of Art, Literature, and Science, or RASLS, whose annual art exhibits have been the most noteworthy events of this kind that have occurred in Saskatchewan. RASL's first conversation, held in October 1910, was meant to celebrate art and its financial worth, but this was not an effort to promote local artists. Prior to this, exhibitions of local art may have been held in schools or civic buildings, but further research is needed to confirm that. What I can prove at this point is that local artisans temporarily displayed artworks in Regina since at least 1884 via agricultural fairs. This is evidenced through prize lists for art-related categories and newspaper articles announcing the category winners. Agricultural fairs are especially relevant to the study of visual culture in the Victorian era. As archivist Jim Burant states, in regard to mid-19th century art exhibitions, they were often incorporated into provincial exhibitions, agricultural fairs, and international expositions in an attempt to refine popular tastes by presentation of models upon which aesthetic sensibilities could be based. So with a selection of agricultural fairs in Regina from 1884 through 1895, I hope to provide a preliminary understanding of Regina's unique historical influences and motivations. This is a work in progress, a work of recovery, and is ongoing. Cheryl Mazeros explored Saskatchewan's early art culture in the thesis Visibility and Representation, Saskatchewan's Art Organizations Prior to 1945. The first chapter is most relevant to this presentation, which is, quote, concerned with a number of small, short-lived, and geographically discrete groups circa 1880 to 1914 that began to show locally produced art to local audiences. Mazeros' subsequent chapters cover the 1920s through 40s. RASLS is the earliest Regina-based group identified by Mazeros, with an earlier group in the southeastern settlement of Cannington Manor in the 1880s. Some of the first visual artworks to depict Saskatchewan, specifically paintings, drawings, and later photographs, were created by artists traveling through the area, aiming to capture the landscape and its residents. This is often intertwined with sentiments around depicting the disappearing race. One example of this artist-explorer archetype is the English artist Edward Roper, who traveled across Canada in 1887 and held an exhibition of the resulting artworks upon his return to England. Roper's Prairie Flowers near Broadview, Assiniboia, and People of the Shark Tribe are scenes from what is now southern Saskatchewan. The first artists to actually reside in Saskatchewan were part of a small settlement in the southeast corner of the province, originally called Cannington and later renamed Cannington Manor. Initially set up in 1882 by British Captain Edward Mitchell Pearce, the aim was to teach Western farming to young, wealthy British men. Later, British families, also wealthy, joined the settlement and essentially transplanted British culture and its class system. Mazeros considers Cannington's art-minded group to be significant, despite its loose structure, and some examples include Cecil Le Mesurier, Bertram Tennyson, the nephew of a poet laureate, Mary Maltby, and Inglis, Ralph, and Dorothea Sheldon Williams. Referencing Le Mesurier's unpublished papers, residents named artists such as John Constable and J.M.W. Turner as favorite artists. Mazeros claims their taste as fundamentally Victorian, inspired by European aesthetics and pressed upon a Canadian backdrop. Inglis Sheldon Williams's body of work, which includes numerous landscapes and wilderness themes, also supports this claim. With Inglis Sheldon Williams as an example, Mazeros states, living on the prairies did not change the fundamental Victorian tastes of Saskatchewan's first artists. Few exhibitions of visual art installed in Regina have included locally produced Victorian-era artworks, and what has been exhibited is typically two-dimensional artworks such as paintings and drawings. The catalog for painting in Saskatchewan 1883 to 1959 includes a single painting made in the Victorian era, out of 57 listed, which works out to 1.8%. This is a watercolor by Frederick Arthur Werner called Buffalo at Moonlight. Werner co-founded the Ontario Society of Artists and visited Western Canada a handful of times, mostly living in Ontario and England. The next oldest painting in the exhibition is from 1907, a 14-year jump forward in the 76-year time span of the exhibition. I mention this in order to emphasize how little attention has been paid to Victorian-era artworks in Regina, less so to local artists, even when the exhibition titles may imply otherwise. Portraits are common in this era, and Indian portraits became prevalent. Lisa Henderson's master's thesis, Emblems of Identity, studied the occurrence of these portraits in Canada, includes examples dating back from 1710 to the 1940s. She argues that these portraits allude to settlers' thoughts on what was perceived as a disappearing race and were emblematic of the settlers themselves rather than those being depicted in the portraits. Often these depictions were not true to life, but instead relied on stereotypes. It is also worth noting that Métis Northwest resistance leader Louis Riel's portrait was printed en masse in 1885, and his trial and hanging in Regina would have made his portrait a common sight to Victorian-era residents, embedding one of many versions of his image in Regina's visual culture. Returning now briefly to Cannington Manor and its connection to Regina. Dispersing by the 1890s, some residents then settled in Regina, notably Dorothea Sheldon Williams. Dorothea, her sister Catherine, the namesake of Sheldon Williams School in Regina, and their brother Inglis, all contributed to Regina's culture through arts and education. Dorothea's involvement in the Arts and Letters Committee of the Regina Local Council of Women was especially relevant in the 1920s and beyond. The LCW's artwork collection was displayed in Regina at the public library prior to the creation of the Norman MacKenzie Art Gallery, the first dedicated gallery in the city. Dorothea's significance takes place mostly outside the time frame of this presentation, but she and her family create a linkage to some of the earliest known organizing around arts appreciation in the area. Lisa Henderson's blog, Early Saskatchewan Art in the News, is where I learned of the 1895 Northwest Territorial Exhibition and the categories of artworks at the fair. Additional archival and newspaper research unveiled that even the earliest agricultural exhibition in Regina in 1884 contained categories for artwork. Prize lists and articles announcing the winners can together develop an impression of the pervasive themes and artists. 2 years old in 1884, the town of Regina is located in the provisional district of Assiniboia and is the capital of the Northwest Territories. The Assiniboia Agricultural Society is preparing to host the first annual exhibition on Thursday and Friday, October 2nd and 3rd. The competition is open to the whole of the Northwest Territories. A catalog of prize lists various categories for horses, cattle, and poultry. Class 17, the Arts and Manufactures category, includes, among other things, photographs and moccasins, but the winners in these categories are not listed in the newspaper article announcing other winners. Whether this is an error due to space limitations in the newspaper because there were no entries is difficult to determine. The Ladies' Department, Class 18, includes a variety of knitting categories, as well as quilting, embroidery, painting on ceramics and fabric, oil and watercolor paintings, and a category for a crayon painting of an Indian subject. The winners listed are given by mostly first initials or honorific and last name. Artwork titles are lacking as well, and together this makes finding images or tracking actual artworks incredibly difficult. However, these artists' names represent some of the very first, if not the first, exhibiting local artists. Additional research is needed in order to develop a clearer picture of the fairs between 1885 and 1888. The 1885 fair was held on October 15th and 16th. The Regina leader describes, these are real names, Mrs. Jelly, Mrs. Kramer, Mrs. Grover, and others, who were involved in arranging the ladies' department, and quote from the newspaper, the fancy quilts, the paintings, the native woodwork, the butter, and 100 objects of interest kept one well occupied and delighted for a pleasant hour. D.D. Reed, the previous year's winner for drawing of an Indian subject, won second place for painting on velvet. The Indian subject drawing category was apparent again, and the 1885 winner was Miss Fleetham. A beadwork category is present, with first place going to J.W. Selby and second to Mrs. Penningale. Genealogy research will be useful to uncover additional details about them. Winners often appear across multiple categories. For example, Mrs. Penningale also won first prize for a log cabin woolen quilt and second in tatting. Presently, I'm developing a list of winners' names to cross-reference and support additional research. Mrs. Marie Swanson and Marie Gilroy both have short biographies on Lisa Henderson's blog. In 1889, Swanson won for oil paintings, watercolors, and drawings. She advertised painting and drawing lessons in 1890, implying that visual art was a source of income and not merely a way to pass time. Gilroy, meanwhile, won prizes for a portrait, crochet and cotton, and painting on wood or panel. When Rassels was organized, Gilroy was involved, and her importance will be explored further in my thesis. I'll fast forward now to the big one, the 1895 Territorial Exhibition. Aside from the competitions, one of the most important aspects of the 1895 Northwest Territorial Exhibition in regard to artistic culture in Regina was Lady Ishbel Aberdeen's visit. Her influence led to the development of a local chapter of the National Council of Women in 1895. While the Regina Local Council of Women were focused on more practical matters in their earlier years, like hospitals and children's welfare, the eventual Arts and Letters Committee that came in the late 1910s was responsible for building part of the original collection donated to Norman MacKenzie Art Gallery. This is especially relevant for Regina art history because MacKenzie's collecting was much less focused on local artists than the LCW's focus was. The prize list for this exhibition includes various types of textiles under the ladies' department, which is listed immediately before the fine arts department. In fine arts, separate categories are available for both professionals and amateurs, and these include paintings, drawings, photography, and agricultural categories like stained glass. A notable competitor at the territorial exhibition is Mary Maltby, one of the past residents of Cannington Manor identified by Mazeros. Maltby won prizes for work in pen and ink, watercolor, and pencil, and several works are described in the newspaper. Two works mentioned include their titles, Old Folks at Home and the pen and ink drawing Dying Lion. Because Maltby's first and last name are known and artwork titles available, there is a possibility of locating artworks in collections or archives with further research. Works by other competitors include those depicting flowers, landscapes, and portraits, giving an indication of the popular themes. Examples are Mrs. Garraway from the town of Pence, with the painting Forget-Me-Nots, and C. Garraway, possibly her husband or other relative, who won prizes for watercolors, including those depicting flowers, a still life, and a work titled Mrs. Garraway and Child. Competitors from across the territories were permitted, and the event was partially sponsored by the Dominion government. The $19,000 in prizes was, as Grant McEwen, the author of A History of Agricultural Fairs in Canada, called Agriculture on Parade, puts it, the biggest prize list ever offered by an exhibition west of Toronto, almost staggering, and it was like a little World's Fair. In summary, members of the earliest known artistically minded group in Regina can be traced to a settlement called Cannington Manor and to societies such as the Regina Society for the Advancement of Arts, Literature, and Science, and the Arts and Letters Committee of the Regina Local Council of Women. It is also clear that early visual culture in Regina was closely related to the work of women, which will be a topic further explored in my thesis. In the Victorian era of Regina, locally produced two-dimensional artwork drew inspiration from Europe while incorporating regional iconography. As Mazeros points out, Saskatchewan art history tends to favor four men, Augustus Kenderdine, James Henderson, Ernest Lindner, and Robert Hurley. To this, I would add English Sheldon Williams, listed with Kenderdine and Henderson in the Encyclopedia of Saskatchewan as the first three professionally trained artists who brought with them the academic style prevalent in British art schools at the time. Before there were galleries, exhibitions of artwork occurred in homes, artist studios, schools, and libraries. It was also displayed at the agricultural fairs. Categories from prize lists and newspaper articles announcing the winners offer a window into the extant contemporaneous visual culture. This temporary ecosystem of art appreciation and criticism, alongside agricultural exhibits, horse races, and baked goods competitions, is fascinating to me. The early agricultural fairs celebrated production, including in the domestic sphere, with fine art being only one aspect of artistic production, and the fairs being a place to exhibit artistic effort. Additional investigation of textile and three-dimensional work, such as painted ceramics and sculpture, is needed in order to develop a richer image of Regina's visual culture in the Victorian period and the early 1900s. This research is an active recovery, as well as a reframing of a canon that privileges male European artists. Before galleries existed in Regina, agricultural exhibitions offered an opportunity for artists to display artwork in temporary but nonetheless public spaces. Thank you.